Hare Krishna, we're going to begin on time in a few seconds, actually. That's it. Thank you all for listening, those of you who are watching and listening. Today is the appearance day of Lord Nrisimhadeva, and also my 46th Sannyasa anniversary. I thought I would begin talking about a very interesting person named Hiranyakasipu. There was a famous James Bond movie called Goldfinger, so this is Gold Cushion. Hiranyakasipu, Gold Cushion. He's interesting because he's really, you could say, a demon's demon. Hiranyakasipu, like no other person in the history of the universe, really went all the way. He really went all the way. I mean, consider, for example, when he was getting power, he performed this yoga. Interestingly, the demons also perform yoga because yoga is just a way of getting power. Power over yourself and power over the world. And good people use power for good purposes, and bad people use power for bad purposes. But power is power. It's just like both devotees and demons drive cars and fly on airplanes and use computers. Some of the best people in the world use computers, and terrorist groups use computers. So yoga is power. And in this world, we can observe a law in the universe that power often comes from austerity. For example, in order to go to college, you have to study hard. You have to, in a sense, delay your freedom. Let's say if you get out of high school or drop out of high school, you have a certain freedom. You can, of course, get a job, which limits your freedom. But if you stay in school, then you remain under the authority of teachers. And so you delay your gratification by staying in college, doing more austerity, and then when you finally get out, as the theory goes, you can make more money. Even, let's say, people that hold jobs. Some people are so attached to their freedom, they would rather be poor and have nothing but not have a job. If you have a job and you have to go to work at a certain time, that's an austerity. But from that austerity, you get money, and money means at least consumer power. And it's not just consumer power, it's the power to live where you want. It's the power to do, in a sense, things that you couldn't do otherwise. So whether it's the austerity of having a job, the austerity of going to college for a long time, if you want to have a body like the Terminator, some people want muscles on their body, so that's another tapasya. And the more people do tapasya in, let's say, bodybuilding, the more they have those funny looking muscles that you see on magazines. Same thing for, let's say, great athletes, or take musicians. Many people casually or as a hobby sometimes pick up musical instruments. They may blow on a flute or play a keyboard just for fun. But the people who are really good at it are the people that work very, very, very hard. In fact, if you look at famous athletes, famous musicians, and famous people in other walks of life, oftentimes there were many, many people that had as much, you could say, born or innate talent as them. There are many people that have the same, not most people you could say, but there are a number of people who have the same talent as those who go on to become famous athletes, musicians, or make a lot of money and so on. The difference is, and people who are very successful will often tell you this, They just work much harder. They really work very hard. So you can see a general principle in this world that hard work, as we would put it, or as they might say it in Sanskrit, tapasya, hard, intelligent work leads to power, artistic power, athletic power, financial power, political power, and also spiritual power. Now, in the case of Hiranyakasipu, Gold Cushion, he took it all the way. He performed so many austerities in his yoga practice that there was nothing left of him but a skeleton, and he actually kept his prana, his life air, circulating inside his bones. Now, you can't fast more than that. I mean, how are you going to beat that? Though, you know, some people may be proud of their fasting, but how are you going to beat that? There's nothing left but your bones. And so it's funny because when Brahma came to him to give him a blessing, maybe Brahma was just speaking to a skeleton, if you think about it. And so he got this power, and he got power over the universe. Like we see these sort of, in comparison, these petty, I probably would say silly, nonsensical politicians of our age that have control over this country or that country or even a state or a city. But Hiranyakasipu made himself the dictator of the universe. So he performed the greatest austerities. He got the greatest political and military power that you can possibly have. And naturally, he was not really humble about it. I mean, if you consider ourselves, any little ability we have, we tend to become proud. We are not in charge of universes. We haven't fasted until we're just bones and prana. And yet we become proud. We're proud of our achievements, which in comparison to Gold Cushion, Hiranyakasipu, are infinitesimal, most trivial accomplishments, and yet it makes us proud. So imagine how proud Hiranyakasipu was. Imagine how proud Hiranyakasipu was. So he was very proud. And there is a common tendency that parents become attached to having their children obey them. If you think about it, when parents have children and the children are completely dependent on the parents, literally, I mean, they can't live. They can't feed themselves. They can't defend themselves. And so the parents have this complete control over their children. And they express their love by working hard and taking care of their children. But of course, to the extent that someone in this world is attached to lording it over, and that's why we all came down here to lord it over. So even though, let's say, normal parents would give their lives for their children and are convinced that they love their children, there's also an element of control, that I control my children and they depend on me. And parents become attached to the children, looking up to the parents and depending on the parents and following the parents. And of course, as we know, once they hit their teenage years, that is totally history, at least in the modern world. So sometimes that can lead to conflict. Remember that Prahlada was only 5 years old. He was quite precocious. So consider that at the age of 5, I mean, normally, at the age of 5, a child is completely under the control and care of his parents, and parents naturally take it for granted that they will make every important decision in the life of a 5-year-old. And so Hiranyakasipu was not only like the ultimate control freak, which he was, he had the natural sentiment of a father. So imagine you combine these two things, the strong bodily parental attachment and being the biggest control freak in the universe. So if you just combine those two things, it's easy to understand why Hiranyakasipu was seriously displeased when his son, in his view, joined the enemy. His ultimate enemy was Vishnu. For one thing, because probably the main thing, Vishnu was the only person in the universe who posed a serious threat to Hiranyakasipu. There were no other contenders. There was no other challenge or menace or threat. He had this very strong hegemony, cosmic hegemony. But Vishnu was a different story. And you can see this actually in the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam, where the Asuras are always sort of trying to figure out who Vishnu is. And they always boast that, yes, I can defeat Vishnu. Vishnu is nothing compared to me. But they never really convince themselves. They're always nervous about it. They're always, looking in their rear view mirror, so to speak, at Vishnu. And so when Hiranyakasipu heard that his son had become a devotee, devoted, a lover of the Lord, this was, it's hard to imagine anything worse from Gold Cushion's point of view. After all, what do people hate more than treason? It's one thing when someone is your known enemy. So, you fight your enemy because that is your known enemy. But it's something else when someone you opened your heart to, someone you trusted, betrays you, in your opinion. That is not something that you were emotionally prepared for. As in the case of someone that you already know is your enemy, and so you sort of pre-hate that person. You don't open your heart at all to that person, only to the extent there's hatred in your heart. And anything that person does, no matter what nasty, dirty trick that person does, it won't surprise you because you already hate that person and you expect that person to do bad things against you. But for someone, when you trust and love someone and they stick the knife in your back, in your opinion, that is probably the most painful and enraging thing. So, it's hard to imagine anything that anyone could do that would have made Hiranyakasipu so angry. And that explains also, considering that he's an Asura, why he was so angry that he wanted to kill his own son. And he would not have been the first, frankly, if you look at the history of political leadership. Actually, he might have been the first because that took place a long time ago. At least maybe the first in this universe. So, and of course, Prahlada is a pure devotee, and Prahlada was not really present there. He was in his own spiritual space. Prahlada was not really in the material world. He was deeply in touch with the Lord and thinking of Krishna everywhere, seeing Krishna everywhere. And to him, what was going on externally, like his father raging and everything, was kind of like if you walk into a house and there's a television set playing over in the corner and you're not really interested in the program. So for Prahlada, all these things that his father was doing were kind of like some television show that's going on in the corner that you're not really watching. He was completely absorbed in Krishna. So we know the story. Hiranyakasipu tried to kill his son, couldn't, and then Prahlada, in answer to Hiranyakasipu's question, informed his father that God is all-pervading. One of the impressive features of the Supreme Lord is that he is all-pervading, and Prahlada tried to explain that to his father. His father was not, so to speak, a good candidate for the Bhakta program. He's the kind of person that doesn't come back to the Sunday feast. And so, then you know the story. Lord Nrisimhadeva appeared, and a battle ensued, and Hiranyakasipu lost, and the Lord won. heavily favored. Of course, Krishna was heavily favored in that battle. So I had the great privilege and honor of taking sannyasa order of life on this day in 1972, which appears to be 46 years ago. I was 23 years old, and maybe I'll just speak briefly about what happened. And I, in telling the story of how Prabhupada blessed me in this way with this fabulous sannyasa order of life, I first have to thank my former wife, Ananga Manjari, because it was really Krishna acted through her. I was very fortunate to have an excellent wife, and who understood me, who understood actually that I was sort of meant to go around the world and preach, and by her Krishna consciousness, by her intelligence, she understood. She understood me spiritually, that this is what I was meant to do. And of course, when I asked Prabhupada for sannyas in May of I think it was May then, 1972, I went with my wife because I knew he would ask her whether she approved, and she did. And so in that sense, it was by the blessing of my wife that I was able to take sannyas, because Prabhupada insisted on that. So the day we took sannyas, I came into the temple room. I was still wearing my grihasta clothes. I think in those days, grihastas wore yellow, which was kind of interesting. So it was like yellow and orange, kind of nice colors for those of you who are into color combinations. Anyway, so we sat down for the ceremony, and the ceremony took place during the morning program. And Prabhupada, instead, at the time he normally chanted Jai Radha Madhava, instead he chanted Bhaja Hure Mana. Bhaja Hure Mana Sri Nanda Nandana Abhaya Charanada Vindare. E Dhana Jovana Putra. And I remember I was standing in the back of the temple room. They were still setting up the fire sacrifice, and Prabhupada chanting, it was so ecstatic that I remember, and as some of you may know, I'm more the rational kind. I'm not always talking about my mystic experiences, but I do have them. And on that morning when Prabhupada was chanting Bhaja Hure Mana, it was so transcendental that it appeared to me that the whole temple room was dancing. And I don't mean all the human devotees in the temple room. I mean the building. It actually, Prabhupada sometimes would just sort of take away the curtain. He would pull the curtain back and just demonstrate inconceivable spiritual potency, which he didn't do. I mean, you could say for those who are pure, he was doing it all the time, but sometimes he did it in a way that everyone could see it. And it really looked like the whole building was dancing. This is the old temple room in LA, the one that Prabhupada wanted to keep as the temple room. So, of course, it wasn't kept as a temple room. But anyway, that was the old temple room that Prabhupada personally designed, and the whole building seemed to be dancing. So that was one very ecstatic, amazing experience. And then when Prabhupada began singing Bhaja Hure Mana, my realization of why he was chanting that instead of Radha Madhava, especially because there's a line in that song, E Dhana Jovana Putra Parijana, that there, where the author of the song, Govindadas, says that wealth, E Dhana, this wealth or the money that one always tries to make in business, and especially in family life, you have to make money, you have to take care of your family. So E Dhana Jovana, youth, your money and your youth, Putra, your children, and Parijana, and all of your relatives, because when one takes sannyas, of course, I mean, there are unlimited jokes one could make about sannyasis giving up wealth. In the modern day, I understand that. the current social conditions where people give a lot of donations to sannyasis. But I mean, and there is a bit of humor there. But in defense of the sannyas ashram, I would say that in sannyas life, even if one does receive a lot of money, as Prabhupada did actually, that you really have to visibly spend it for the mission. For example, I don't drive around in a luxury car. Why? Because I think it's inappropriate to take all the respect given to a sannyasi and then, buy a luxury car for myself. Of course, Prabhupada sometimes had luxury cars, but that was a different time. Those were different circumstances, and I'm not going to imitate that. But in my own life, those are my own instincts, that it's not appropriate. And I do have on, by the way, this $300 designer shirt. That's a joke, actually. That was a joke. So a sannyasi, even if he's given a lot of money, has to be very careful, if he is serious in his duty, to only spend money in ways that are clearly meant for spreading the Hare Krishna movement and helping Vaishnavas. So there is that restriction. By the way, I appreciate all these funny little things that bubble up that the devotees send on Facebook. They're kind of funny. So, so Prabhupada was singing to us and saying, do not lament that you are giving up certain things. You're not going to live in a family, a normal bio family with your dear wife and your kids and all that. That's not going to happen. You're giving that up. And you're not going to have the freedom to spend whatever money you receive as you like. It's like it's nobody's business. It's my money. It's no, you have to really, and you have to spend your life trying to help other people, which is ecstatic. And Lord Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that is the greatest service, and no one pleases me more than the person who preaches. But it can be exhausting. There's such a thing as clergy burnout. And so always having to live for other people, it has profound rewards. It has extraordinary rewards, but it's also in its own way an austerity. Just like family life involves a lot of austerity, but it also has its rewards. So, so that was my realization at the time. I was 23 years old, and my realization was that Prabhupada is a loving spiritual father, encouraging his children and saying, I appreciate that you're doing this for my mission, and be strong and don't lament, and just go out there and do it. So then, as per custom, in the middle of the ceremony, actually, it's another interesting thing. Kirtananda Swami did the fire sacrifice, and Prabhupada asked him to give the talk. Prabhupada actually didn't give the lecture at my sannyas initiation. It was myself and three others, myself, Rupanuga, Satsvarupa, and Bali Mardan. The four of us took sannyas together in May of 1972. And Prabhupada asked Kirtananda, who did the fire sacrifice, to also give a talk, which he did. And then at a certain point, the sannyas candidates left the room, the temple room, and actually first some devotees brought us on these platters, so to speak, on a silver platter, our new sannyas clothes. And I don't think it was new neck beads. There's some kind of thing in ISKCON where you change your neck beads. I don't know if that's really required, but anyway, at least we had our sannyas clothes. And so we went out, obviously, to a private room. We changed into our sannyas clothes and took our dandas. And we marched back into the temple room. No, actually, no. The danda, I'm remembering now. Sorry, I haven't really thought about this, but we came back in our sannyas clothes, and then we sat down, and then Prabhupada called us up one by one, and he gave us our danda. So there was a physical awarding of sannyas by Prabhupada in the sense that he actually handed us our dandas. And There's some funny stories too, because right after the sannyasa ceremony, we went out on Harinam. The idea was that because in those days there were very, very, very few sannyasis. I think the only sannyasis in ISKCON then were Tamal Krishna and I think Kirtananda was in good standing then. Kirtananda, Tamal Krishna, and Trivikram. I think that was it. I don't know if there were any other sannyasis. And ISKCON had gotten pretty big, so sannyasa then was a huge thing. It was a huge thing to be a sannyasi. So the leaders decided that just after the sannyasa ceremony, we should all go together, and they had a huge Sankirtan vehicle. And we went to Long Beach, and we would go to Long Beach and do Harinam, and the charismatic new sannyasis would lead the devotees in Harinam to show that we'd taken sannyas to preach, not just to get free lunch. Although, can't complain about free lunch either, right? So we went out to Long Beach, and it's interesting because it was May, but it was a hot day, and the sun was very bright, and we didn't wear hats in those days because in those days we didn't know there were supernatural entities out there like skin cancer. And so I actually got sort of a mild case of heat stroke. So we were coming back from Sankirtan, and I was standing there, in the front of this very large Sankirtan vehicle, and all the devotees were there, admiring the new sannyasis, and I was preaching. And meanwhile, I was so nauseous. I was like, I couldn't believe how nauseous I was from this heat stroke. And yet I had to be tough. I had to be the strong sannyasi everyone thought I was supposed to be. So I remember that, giving, the strong preaching while I was almost like fainting from this heat stroke. But anyway, it was fun. Then we went back to Prabhupada's room after that, and he wanted to see, I can't remember actually technically whether we went to see Prabhupada before or after the Harinam, but around that time he went to Prabhupada's room. And Prabhupada's mood was not like, praising us. It was like, okay, I trusted you. I gave you sannyas. Now, what the hell are you going to do? It's like, what are you going to do with this? And so I remember Satsarupa asked Prabhupada, are there any special duties for sannyasis? And Prabhupada said, just keep the wheels turning. In other words, don't get bogged down. Don't just stay in one place and end up falling in love or something or becoming attached to power. Because that's what happens if if a sannyasi stays in one place, then you see the same people every day. And the Bhagavatam says, Dhyayato Vishyan Pungsat, by contemplating the sense objects. And so if a sannyasi, let's say, keeps seeing the same attractive woman every day, and that woman notices that the sannyasi is actually occasionally looking at her, and so naturally she volunteers, do some special service, and the sannyasi is delighted to get that special service from such a sincere soul. And I'm sure you can all connect the rest of the dots. In fact, that's where Chaturmasya comes from. Chaturmasya just means the 4 months, the 4-month season, because in India, the sannyasis would either be in very remote locations where they just performed austerities, or they would travel around and teach. But what they would not do is just hang out in cities, just hang out in society. They were not in society, so to speak. And so they walked around and often walked barefoot, or maybe they had sandals. But the point is, in ancient India, roads were not paved. That was the pre-asphalt Bhuloka. And in India, at least northern India, there are 4 months when it rains a lot. Like there's a ridiculous amount of rain. Basically, it's all the rain they're going to have for the rest of the year. And so the roads get very, very muddy. And walking around during the rainy season is it's not something you're going to do. It's not practical. You'd end up most of the time up to your knees in mud. And so therefore, the sannyasis stop during the rainy season because the roads are all just full of mud and water. But when you stop, that means you're in some village, and there's some beautiful young ladies that are so excited and thrilled to have this opportunity to serve a sannyasi. And again, we all know what comes next. And that's why it's during the Chaturmasya, when the sannyasis can't travel, or kind of stuck in one place, that they perform extra austerities to make sure they don't get themselves in trouble. So they eat very little, and there's all kinds of austerities to keep them out of trouble. That's the whole point, obviously. Not a bad idea. It's kind of practical. Because even Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Vishaya vinivartante niraha rasidehinam. When embodied souls fast, all the senses kind of weaken. And so, but Krishna says the taste remains. Now, so if you have a sort of a permanent strategy of just fasting, then obviously, eventually your desires will overcome you. But if it's just 4 months, like, just you can hang in there for 4 months, and then as soon as the 4 months are over, you can start traveling again, and then you can finally have a good meal. Because first of all, you're walking, you're getting a lot more exercise, and you're traveling. So these things are all very practical. They say even the saffron color for renunciants is because they're always traveling around, and it's an earth color so that you wouldn't see all the dirt as easily, which is an interesting concept. So anyway, so Prabhupada said keep the wheels turning, because in this age he didn't say just keep the sandals flopping, because in this day and age we have cars, we have motorized vehicles. And I remember then the next day we were walking at Venice Beach with Prabhupada, and Vishnu Jana was on the walk, Vishnu Jana Swami, who was a really, really nice person. And he went to Prabhupada and said, I've heard that our dandas are incarnations of Vishnu, so we can offer our food to our dandas. All I can say is in 1972, this is the kind of thing that devotees could even believe, and some devotees could even believe in 2017. Anyway, 2018. So Prabhupada just kind of looked at him and kind of laughed, like, is that a serious question? He said, no, Danda is not a deity of Vishnu. And then I think either Satsvarupa or Vishnu Jana asked Prabhupada whether sannyasis should travel with deities. And Prabhupada said no. He said Lord Chaitanya never traveled with deities. Of course, nowadays it's kind of like the way that sannyasis travel with Shilas. And I'm not criticizing that. I mean, I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying that in my presence, Prabhupada said that we should follow Lord Chaitanya and we don't need to travel with deities. But of course, if someone wants to, they can. So I took sannyas and I set out to preach. Actually, I had an interest, and then these interesting things kept happening when I took sannyas. I think the next day after I took sannyas, I went out with a couple of brahmacharis to do book distribution. So we went to these apartment buildings not far from the temple. Anyway, so I approached this one guy, and he was, I think, a pimp. And there was a guy that manages prostitutes, and he had some of his girls there with him. Of course, I was very, you could say, innocent. I mean, for one thing, in my neighborhood, there were no prostitutes or pimps. And so, I mean, where I grew up, I'd never really seen that. So I approached him and told him it was about God. He was so angry. I mean, that's all I did. I just approached him and said, hi, this is a nice magazine about whatever, back to Godhead. And he was so angry just at seeing Krishna, seeing Bhagavad Gita, that he literally started like rolling up his sleeves like he's going to punch me or something. And so I was thinking, seriously? I was thinking, boy, this guy's really nuts. So I just taken sannyas. I'm not going to start, hitting him with my danda or something. So I had tennis shoes on, and I had been very athletic before I joined the Hare Krishna movement. So I just I easily outran him. I told the brahmacharis, like, let's go. So we just continued Sankirtan, and then about a half hour later, I had to sort of not go to where that person had been, but just go past that street a half block away, and he saw me again. He started chasing us again. I thought, this is so funny. So I was actually had the honor of being attacked by a pimp on my first day out on book distribution after taking sannyas. So then I really had no plan. I mean, that was the mood back then. You take sannyas, Krishna will show you what to do, which was actually a good idea. So then I remember Tulsi Das, my godbrother Tulsi Das, who was at that time was president of Denver, which was a big temple, came to me and said, we came down here, the temple came down to see Prabhupada, we're going back to Denver, driving back, why don't you come with us? So I said, sure. I didn't have any better offer than that. So I got in the car. Because I was a sannyasi, I got to sit in the front seat. And we drove to Denver without stopping, which means we drove all night, which was not a great idea, but it wasn't my decision. So we got to Denver, and there I was. And suddenly I was a sannyasi, and everybody wanted to hear from me, and it was pretty ecstatic. So I would go out every day and sell books. There was a market chain, supermarket chain back then in the West called Westward Ho Markets. Westward Ho was the kind of like the battle cry. People that were going west in the old frontier days, Westward Ho, like Jai Ho. So there was a Westward Ho market chain. I would go in front of the door, the entrance to the market, and just sell books all day. And then preach, in the classes. When I had enough money, I took a plane to Chicago, Denver to Chicago. And my brahmachari assistant, who had asked to join me, Ojaswi, he passed away, but he was my first brahmachari assistant officially, Ojaswi. He didn't sell as many books. He didn't have enough money for his ticket, so he had to wait a few days. And then I flew to Chicago. By the time he flew to Chicago, I'd already flown to Pittsburgh, actually. I was kind of in that mood of sannyasa and 23 years old. So when actually I take that back. I flew from Chicago to New York, and I got there in the middle of the night. I mean, we were so spaced out back then. We didn't do things like take flights that arrived at appropriate hours. Oh, here's a flight, 23-year-old male, brain not fully formed. So I arrived in the middle of the night, at midnight, and somehow or other I found my way, took a train, got to the Brooklyn Temple. Balimardan Maharaj at that time, Swami, he had taken sannyas with me, and so he was happy to see me when I walked in. For some reason, he and Jayadwaita, who was brahmachari then, were still up. It was very late, and Jayadwaita was in Balimardan's office, and when I came in, they led me to his room. I think it was Gadadhar brahmachari that greeted me. And he got me at the train station. Then he took me to the temple president's room, who was Balimardan. And then Balimardan, the first thing he said to me was, "Oh, Hiranyakasipu, it's nice to see you. Your former wife is here in the temple." And so, I've been sannyas literally about 2 weeks. And so I just talked to him for 3 minutes, offered obeisances, and had someone take me back to the train station. And I took a train or a bus. I took something to Pittsburgh. And why did I go to Pittsburgh? Well, as the eternal question goes, why not? Somehow I think that someone suggested, like, hey, why don't you go to Pittsburgh? Some devotee said that. So it wasn't the closest temple, but I took an overnight. And so I got to Pittsburgh and went to the temple. And when I got there, they told me there's going to be a huge festival. Like in those days, they had these gigantic hippie festivals and New Age festivals. And this one was being held in State College, one of the great university cities in America, which is sort of halfway between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, Penn State, Pennsylvania State University. So I went with them to the festival, and that's when I met Ravindra Swarup, who was president of Philadelphia. And we actually took over the festival. I'll tell you what happened. This is a true story. It was this huge festival with thousands of people, and it started to rain. I mean, seriously rain. And so everyone took shelter in this huge geodesic dome, which was part of the festival. So we were in there also. And so the devotees were all huddled around me because I was a sannyasi, the senior, mature, wise 23-year-old. And so devotees were all around me, and I was preaching, and people started listening because I was kind of like really preaching, and people started turning around and gathering around, and it started to turn into a Hare Krishna program with like thousands of people. And then I said, let's do kirtans. We did kirtan. Everyone got into it. I mean, there was nothing else to do. Plus, these were people that had come to sort of a mystic New Age festival, so everyone was chanting. And this huge festival in a major university city literally turned into a Hare Krishna festival. And we were chanting and chanting, and after about an hour, I was like, I can't play the drum anymore. And my voice. So I did one of those things where you kind of like dramatically end the kirtan, speed up, then do a fancy little drum thing, and then end the kirtan. Problem is, nobody stopped. I realized there's no off switch on this kirtan because the people chanting, they just kept going. They didn't even slow down. And it went on for another hour or two. You couldn't turn it off. They were just so that's how it turned into a Hare Krishna festival. And then I wanted to keep moving because Prabhupada had said, keep the wheels turning. I took that very seriously. Keep the wheels turning. Don't get entangled. Just, you're 23-year-old sannyasi. Keep moving. So in those days, and maybe still, they have in America something called drive-away cars, which means that there are people who want to transport their automobiles from one city to another, but they can't drive themselves, and so they put an advertisement, and then someone that wants to go to that city offers to drive the car. So the person driving only pays gas, and then they get, in a sense, almost like a free trip to where they're going. So I got one of those cars. It was a Carmen Ghia. Like I don't think they make those anymore. It's like a really tiny Volkswagen, but like a really little one. And so the obvious question is, how many Hare Krishnas could fit into a Carmen Ghia? And the answer was, in this case, 4 or 5. So there we were, 4 or 5 in this tiny little car, and we drove. And by the time we were going to Houston, when we got to South Carolina, I think probably a light came on saying that there was a serious problem with the motor. And somehow either the light didn't come on or I didn't see the light. But since I'm an ISKCON leader, I'll say the light didn't come on. So the car broke down, and the car was towed, I think, to Anderson, South Carolina. And this is South Carolina in 1972. I mean, South Carolina in 1972 was basically California in 1952. And so we took it to the Volkswagen place. No, and then they were very nice to us, actually. There was a nice young guy who was the owner of this really modern new Volkswagen place. And so we went, let's go sell books. So we went around door to door, and the first door, someone opened the door, and there was this huge dog. I mean, this dog was like a small horse, and it was like barking. It looked like it just really wanted to have us for lunch. And so we ran, and I thought, well, maybe that's enough door to door for right now. Then we ran into this guy, this young guy our age. In those days, he was kind of like a hip type person in Anderson, South Carolina, which means that anyone else that looked a little different became his best friend immediately, because this was Anderson, South Carolina, 1972. So he really liked us. He liked Krishna consciousness. And it turned out that his father was the police chief in Anderson, South Carolina, which means that we had no further problems with Sankirtan if we wanted to go out. So we actually stayed in his house. We actually stayed in the home of the police chief while our car was being fixed. And then back in the Volkswagen place, there was a second floor, but was open. There was no ceiling. It was just it was one big open building, but it had like a platform, like a mezzanine, they call it. And so what I did was, we were so strict, is that in the evening before the place closed, because I'd become friends with the dealership owner and all the salesmen. So they gave us permission. We set up a little altar upstairs in this open showroom, and we set up our pictures, and we had a full evening program with drum kartals, kiba jaya, everything, bhaja bhagata, and all the car salesmen and the owner actually took part in the kirtan. They actually came to the evening program. So that was really great. And then by the time I left there, I was I was really friends with the owner, nice young guy, owner of the car dealership. Anyway, then finally we got the car fixed. We made it to Houston, and then so many things happened. I developed my college preaching program. But Prabhupada said, maybe I'll end with this, just one more last thing, and that is one more last thing, yes. And that is that Prabhupada says something to me which was so important. I remember when I came to see Prabhupada the day I took sannyas, and Prabhupada said to me that just as Lord Nrisimhadeva, just as Lord Nrisimha protected Prahlada Maharaj, he will also protect you. He will also protect you. And I mean, you can just imagine what a blessing that is. And I've always believed that, and I've always found it to be true, that throughout my life, the Lord has really protected me. And I mean, when I was young, the way I lived when I was young, even before I joined the movement, the way I used to drive when I was a teenager, I mean, if you want a proof that God exists, I'm still alive. I mean, the fact that I'm still alive is an absolute proof that there's a God. And even as a young devotee, I mean, so many adventures, so many dangerous situations, all kinds of dangers. And Krishna always protected me. He's protected me. He protects me every day. And actually, if we accept him, Krishna will protect us every day. And Krishna comes in a special form, Nrisimhadeva, just to emphasize that he really is protecting us. So there's that special pastime to emphasize how he is our protector. There's that song that Prabhupada put at the beginning of the Krishna book, Krishna, 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 hey, then Raksha Mam, which means protect me, Palamam, take care of me, guard me, protect me. And even the residents of Vrindavan, they're pure devotees, they're eternally liberated devotees, but when there was this danger, there are some dangers that are so shocking that you just cry out to Krishna. That is not, doesn't mean you're approaching Krishna with material desires. Some things are just really shocking. Some situations are just so difficult that you just, for your own sanity, you have to cry out to Krishna for protection. And that's even what the liberated devotees in Krishna's Vrindavan, they did that. So Krishna is eternally our protector. Anyway, thank you all very much. And I wish everyone a happy Lord Narasimha Appearance Day. And thank you all for watching. Hare Krishna.